We had the opportunity to grab a croissant yesterday and meet in person, which was
Yes, it was very nice.
it was very nice.
Very French.
And the thing I couldn't believe I hadn't realized before were your initials.
Yes.
Billy, Bohan, Chinique.
Yeah, BBC.
BBC. Very nice. And was there any particular reason other than, do you lean into that at all?
We talked about this a little bit, but for a while growing up, my friends would call me Google because I would know a little bit about everything. But then as I went into my professional life, I kind of became the center of news for what was going on in the office. So as we started to kind of come up with short ways to refer to each other rather than so formal, BBC seemed natural. So inspired by the main character.
We're very glad to have it. So last year, when you were here up on stage as well, your title was a global branding marketer. But this year, you've added another little add-on to that, which is AI transformer. Oh, sorry. Can you tell me a little bit about what that actually entails and why that new role?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks to the Brand Innovators team for inviting me back. I always love chatting to anybody at Brand Innovators. They're a great organization. Last year when I was here, one of the things that we talked about was a piece of work we did with Jennifer Lopez called Gen AI. And that kind of opened our brand up to a set of conversations with people in the industry about how companies like ours that are travel by trade, but really lifestyle brands, how they were going to lean into the use of new technology. And my boss went to an event earlier this year with Google and had what I like to refer to as a tech awakening. He essentially came back as a changed man and decided that he needed some help to take our company forward and become AI native. And he needed some help with that. So he's asked me to kind of lead that for our enterprise. So now I kind of am transforming our company to really empower and accelerate everyone at Virgin Voyages through partnering with AI.
So we hear AI thrown around a lot. It's probably thrown around more than
Yes.
rosé.
We're going to make it a drinking game.
Right.
Every time you hear AI, you need a rosé.
But let's talk about some real case studies here. So day to day, what does it actually mean when you're implementing AI into maybe it's the UX or the user journey or the journey itself of the customer to what your team does and through obviously what marketing you put out into the world. So could you talk through some perhaps case studies?
Yeah, absolutely. What I will say is most people today are using AI in a silo. They're using it for themselves. And that has its own set of complexities, especially if you're using it for business, if you have complex or confidential data. But deploying AI at scale for a company has a lot of red tape. One of the things working at a Virgin brand, which is great, is we can kind of disrupt things. And so having a marketing leader lead the AI transformation for a company is not really normal. But the reason that we've decided to move forward with that is we're kind of not taking no for an answer. So we are, for example, we've deployed an enterprise version of OpenAI's ChatGPT. But rather than using it to generate copy, we're using it to help plan our vessels so we can save money on gas, which isn't normally a use case you would hear today. Another really great example is we're using the integration with ChatGPT to analyze customer sentiment. And we took a process that our general managers of the ships would have to go and essentially look at every single comment and generate a report that would take them 10 hours a week. Now it's all done by a machine. They don't have to do anything. So we're using it in ways to help give people back their time, to use a corporate slogan, to raise their gaze and be a little bit more strategic, and also to help them uncover things that a human would never notice, right? Trend data or things that are important for us to make decisions on or operationalize, but that aren't necessarily things we would get to in another way.
And something that was very noticeable on your feed last week, I noticed, and I've been watching the film like maybe 100 times, is the Mermaids film that came out last week. Congratulations to you and the team.
Thank you.
I know you worked with native foreign on that. Before we talk about the film, I loved your story about how you got in touch with Native Foreign in the first place, and if you could just talk us through the journey and how the film came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So we released a 3-minute cinematic film that's inspired by the mermaids who are the livery on the side of our ships. It's completely generated using AI, and it's based on a kind of impromptu speech that our CMO gave at a crew check-in. And so we took the look and feel of those mermaids, the inspiration that he had in that meeting, and we generated like an origin story for them. You can check it out on our YouTube channel. It's really cool. But actually, we got in touch with Native Foreign as a cold call. They had heard about the work we did with Gen AI and reached out and were like, hey, we're one of the only companies in the world that has access to Sora. At the time, that's the video generation tool that OpenAI has. At the time, only 7 companies had the commercial license to use it. Ultimately, it took us about a year to get to the final version of the film, but it was a true collaboration with us, them, and their incredible team, and the AI tools to kind of get to that film.
Now, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Obviously, this was a film completely generated by AI, no actors, no physical sets.
Which is hard for many people to believe, including Richard Branson. We showed him the film last week, and he was like, wow, it's so beautiful. How much time did you have to spend with the ladies? And like, he really just could not believe that it's completely synthetic.
But let's talk about it. I mean, we know we're not working with actors here. This is something I know you grapple with. It's a company that really prides itself on inclusivity and bringing people the best side of themselves every day. How do you grapple with that, with the technology, with perhaps the less need for using humans in that respect? How do you grapple with that, and how are you looking at moving forward?
Well, what I'll say is the reason we decided to go down this path on this project is like we're not Disney. We're not Industrial Light and Magic. Like we don't have Lord of the Rings budget to create the brand storytelling that we need to do in order to help people come along for the journey. And so I would say a year ago, what we produced would not have been possible.
Right.
But one of the things, and this is the reason that we ultimately decided to move forward with Native Foreign, is they have a real focus on the ethics of AI. So, for example, you'll notice there's continuity through the film, which is something that is, if you've tried to generate assets using AI today, it's actually very hard to get the same character with the same look and feel to show up across multiple scenes. They have a contextual model that you basically train it to say, this is the character. Use these attributes. Use this formula, for lack of a better word, to produce their eye, their hair, their mouth, what the position of those things are in relation to each other. And so we aren't using a model that's scraping inspiration from other artists. We aren't using a model that's using other pieces of art. All of the things you see there are originally generated. I would say something we learned over the course of this project is AI is actually pretty dumb. Like, when you don't give it explicit instructions, it's not actually really good at producing creative content, but it's incredibly smart at following instructions. So if you're very specific with what you want to see, it can do creative work for you and output things that are fidelity-wise exceptional, like AAA quality. So it's something that we were very conscious of when we were building the film.
Now, of course, you do lean into humans as well.
Yes.
You do, it's not all AI films. You have lent very heavily into influencer marketing over the last couple of years. Could you talk about that journey? Because I know it's very important for you that people live and breathe and get to go on the ship even before they talk about it. So if you could talk about like how you're leaning into influencer marketing and how it's working.
Yeah, what I would say is like we don't sell synthetic vacations. We want people to really go and take control over the time off that they have, and we feel like we have a product that really lets people take advantage of that fully. But what we found over the course of the last few years is as a brand, we can tell people the facts about where we'll go, how we'll get you there, how much it costs, the things that are included, but they really want to hear from genuine, real people about how that made them feel, about how they came back and what the impression was that was left on them. And so influencer and content creator marketing is a huge part of our overall marketing. It's something that for us, I don't think we would be in business if we hadn't kind of switched the dial and really leaned into that. It was interesting, the panel right before with the folks from Lowe's. I think they have such a great perspective on the way the next generation of people are going to lean into creators. And I love the sentiment of switching over to the in real life and using the other things that surround sun. I would say for us, we're using that methodology, but we're doing it now, not 10 years from now.
So let's talk about the Virgin brand for a second. We've been talking about the Virgin brand, but the Virgin Voyages brand is obviously a subset of the master brand.
Yeah.
So that and it's very similar in many ways to the BBC Studios. We are the commercial arm of the BBC. Everybody knows the BBC, but it also comes with, as everyone knows us, but it also comes with that legacy that not everyone necessarily knows or understands. Let's talk about that with Virgin Voyages, because obviously you're a startup cruise line. Your timing was impeccable. I believe it was April 2020 was the original one, and then
February
2020.
February 14th.
Excellent. Yeah, February 14th, beautiful day. And then I think the first voyage, I think Scarlet, was in 2021, right?
Yeah, October
2021. So you had to pivot a lot there, but you had the Virgin brand behind you. I think anybody else may have struggled in that case. But how have you lent into Virgin, and how have you created your own identity?
So I'll start with what happened at the beginning. So we are an American-based British heritage company. So obviously you have the Virgin scroll on the side of anything you do. For us, it's a vessel. It comes with a lot of responsibility. People have really high expectations of you being different, being really consumer focused, providing incredible value for the money that they're going to spend with you, and expecting you to throw a hell of a party, I would say. So we ticked the boxes on all those things, I think, right at the beginning. But then we are, as part of the Virgin Group, the brand that has the longest touch point with customers, right? If you think about Virgin America or Virgin Atlantic, they take you on a flight, could be 14, 15 hours, but then you get off the plane and you could go to a Virgin hotel, but they're not worried about your food or what your entertainment's going to be or what you're going to do while you're in the city. We have to do all those things. And so for us, it's adding the Virgin twist to each of those things to make it feel special and unique. And so it's a lot of responsibility. I would say what has been our unique take on the Virgin brand is we want people to leave better than they showed up. And that looks different for every single person. It's not that you need to have the Virgin Voyages experience. We want you to have your experience, and it's powered by us. So for us, it's really about that personalization and you walking away with something that feels genuinely yours.
You mentioned people almost leaving better than they came on ship. You have various partnerships with health brands. I know that you have worked with Barry's in the past, and I believe that you're working with SoulCycle. You've noticed that people are actually starting to discover their healthy side when they get on the ship, right? So that's obviously a brand partnership that's worked particularly well for the both of you. Can you talk through some other partnerships that you do with some other brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so for those of you who don't know, we're an adults-only brand. So you have to be 18 to sail with us. And what that does is it lets people, whether or not they're a parent or whether or not they're traveling with various family members, they can step back into the spotlight and be the main character on their own vacation, which isn't always the case, right? I was mentioning to you a story that happened. We were launching a ship in Greece in 2023, and there was a journalist on board who hadn't been feeling very good about his health journey. Not eating right, he was traveling a lot for work, but he was going to be on the ship with us for 7 days. And so he noticed the gym when he was going to breakfast on the first day and was like, you know what? I'm going to go walk on the treadmill. And every day he went and walked a little bit more. the combination of that plus the healthy food that we have on the ship, everything's made to order. He kind of transformed his life in a really positive way. And he told us this story after the fact. He didn't tell us what was going on, but wrote us kind of a really beautiful note after. And what was interesting is, as you take a look at some of the survey data for people who especially lean into the wellness part of our journey, that story actually happens a lot, where people feel because it's there, it's accessible, it's included, they feel like the barrier to entry is really low, and they can actually go in and start that journey if it fits them.
I know you mentioned that it's obviously a very packed market, and I would say that obviously you had to go through all of COVID. Probably you went through COVID in a way that probably everyone was affected, but you particularly were affected. It's interesting because if there was something that happens on one cruise ship, all of the cruise industry was kind of tainted by that same thing, which is interesting. Wouldn't necessarily happen with hotels or any other travel brand. But I wonder if, like, when you're talking about the next iteration of the brand, I know that there's a new ship coming out. I believe it's going to go through the Panama Canal. Brilliant, which is a great British word. The reason for this is also to attract a whole new audience as well, right? You're constantly trying to find new audiences, not just the ones who are trying to better for themselves. But could you talk about, like, why Brilliant, why now, and who you're trying to attract?
Yeah, I would say, well, it's exciting for us because the fourth ship shall be the last in this class of vessel. The Holy Trinity in cruises, the Caribbean, summer in Europe, and summer in Alaska. And so we modified this fourth ship to be able to fit through the Panama Canal, and she will be America's ship. She'll be based in the North America market for the entire year. She does the fall from New York, Canada, and Bermuda. She'll spend the winter in the Caribbean and do deep Caribbean voyages. She'll then go through the Panama Canal and do the spring in LA. So you'll get some really incredible LA itineraries that go to Northern California, the west coast of Mexico, and then she'll spend the summer based out of Seattle going to Alaska. So for us, we had to make some strategic decisions on when we took delivery of the ship because we were impacted by COVID. And now finally having the ship online, being able to do these itineraries that have been a dream for many of us for many, many years, it's a really exciting turning point for the company.
Obviously going into Alaska, I've mentioned I haven't yet taken a cruise, but having talked with you, I think it's around the corner now.
We have to get you on board.
And certainly going to Alaska would be a dream. And one of the things I know that you also grapple with as a company is Sir Richard is heavily into conservation and into the environment. Being a very large ship in the ocean doesn't always necessarily lean into conservation. So what have you done as a company to do the absolute best for your customers, yourselves, and of course this Earth?
I would say generally the cruise industry has its eye on becoming a much more sustainable and energy conscious industry. Us specifically, all of our ships will be shore power enabled, which means when you show up, like you see the cruise ships out there in the sea, when they're alongside like that, they're just churning through fuel all day long. But when you are alongside in a port, you can actually plug in just like an appliance, and it reduces the energy consumption by 90%, which is really incredible. For us, we also from the very beginning had a really conscious use of single-use plastics. So like you won't find any bottles of water on board. So there's water refill stations. We encourage everybody to bring a water bottle when they come on board with us. And most cruise ships use 47 different single-use plastics. We have brought that number down to 14 and have a plan to bring it down to 8 by the end of next year. And that's doing simple things like reinventing the way when you order room service. We call it Ship Eats. We redesigned all of the packaging so it stays warm or cold. It stays really in a nice presentation, but all of the materials used in that are completely reusable. The same thing with the food, right? So we don't have as much food waste because all of the food is made to order. So we don't have a huge buffet. We have a food hall. So when you walk up, you tell them what you'd like. They prepare it for you right then, and then it's fresh. Plus, you don't have as much food waste. So I think we generally are trying to provide and be less impactful on the environment. But it also goes to the places that we visit, right? We have a conservation group internally that helps build a better relationship with the communities we visit. So that could be through like community works projects or scholarships for people in the islands that we visit. So lots of different ways.
Well, just in case I hadn't mentioned it already, but the BBC does have a little thing called BBC Earth, and,
Yes.
and a gentleman called Sir David Attenborough. So if you ever want to work with him, I think David and Richard are friends.
Yes, we have a little project we're working on that I asked Richard to see if David would be willing to participate. But his response to me was, David stays booked and busy. So I think you guys have a monopoly on his time.
So you managed
at
to
this
get
point.
Jennifer Lopez, but not
Yes.
Attenborough.
Well, you never know.
You never know.
Yeah.
I like the David AI idea. We should
be
talk
cool.
about that afterwards. We've talked about, obviously, many successes that you've had, but can we just talk about, obviously, not everything's rosy. Not everything goes to plan. I mean, COVID, obviously, out of your control. Can you talk about some things that were totally out of your control, but also things that were in your control that didn't go so right, and what have you learned from those?
I think, like, one of the things on my side of the journey that didn't go so right is our brand positioning, right? I think as a company that has a lot of expectations in the market, it's a noisy place. We didn't do a great job at explaining to people that we are essentially a great vacation option for anyone who's 18 and over. We really leaned in on heavily marketing to millennials, and it alienated some older cruisers who the product is actually a really great option for. We've since corrected that and heard from the community at large that they feel more aware and their expectations are set more correctly based on the marketing we have now versus where we started. I would say on the flip side, we also really need to listen to consumers when they tell us what they want, right? So consumer sentiment has changed on planning for trips. The world is a crazy place. They don't want to think about what they're going to do in a year, unless it's something big like going to Antarctica or you're doing like an African safari. Most consumers are deciding what they're going to do for vacation within 3 months of the trip. And we need to make sure that when we're putting information in the market, when we're putting new itineraries on sale, that it also kind of accommodates for that shorter planning cycle. So it's something that we're actively working on.
A shorter planning cycle, that sounds lovely in our
Yeah.
world. So actually, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because Virgin, I think it's fair to say, is a very sexy brand. You know, it brings that, it exudes that kind of that feeling. But that also does. There is some difficulty with that. I mean, the new film, there are the 4 sirens, all of a certain body type, and in this world where we're trying to be as inclusive, obviously, as possible to attract as many different people onto the ship as possible. How do you see that the Virgin brand or Virgin Voyages brand evolving to meet those needs, or will you just stay very firm to this kind of very particular?
No, we're definitely not staying firm on anything. I would say one of the best parts about this job is I never know what my day is going to be like when I wake up. So on the diversity and inclusion piece, I think in America, where we're based, you see a lot of companies pulling away from DEI initiatives. I would say that is not the case in Virgin companies. Whenever I'm asked a question about this, I always say this is the first job I've ever had where being my authentic self at work has been an accelerant for my career. And I would say that will likely be a sentiment for most people that have worked at a Virgin company. We also make a conscious decision by whenever we're casting for creators or we're doing a production, we want to make sure that we're authentically representing the people you'll see on the ship. So it's not just a box we're ticking off, but it's really about embracing the community and making sure that they're represented in the marketing we're doing. One thing I will say about the film, it's mythical sea creatures,
right?
As a reminder. So they do have a certain sexual appeal to them, but it is meant to represent kind of the mythology of what that is. One of the things that we actively went through when we were developing the piece, we talked to a lot of the female leaders on our marketing team to make sure it wasn't appearing through the male gaze. Mm-hmm. You'll notice none of the women interact with men in the film. And it's also making sure the physics are right for the way that the women are represented, because those things are important to us. We feel a real privilege to be able to do that type of storytelling, and we don't want to alienate people by having them think we're misrepresenting the way that women look digitally.
So there are we even mentioned it yesterday. There are I had some concerns about going on a cruise just because I felt I was going to be locked in one place. I know
very common.
And obviously now I'm going to have to go. But how is the industry changing, or how do you see the industry changing to attract what is needed? You obviously continuously need to battle against your competitors in the space, but as you mentioned, your competitors aren't even necessarily those floating out on the water.
Yeah, I would say the cruise industry is one that's really built on innovation. So you'll see some of our competitors, like Royal Caribbean, for example, they have incredible ships. They're huge, and they have the most amazing technology on board. We actively decided not to go down that path because there's already a great option in the marketplace. We looked for a white space, and that was adults-only cruising. We have a mostly inclusive value proposition. So you get on board, you pay to get on the ship, you don't pay to get off the ship, which is a really common practice in the cruise industry. We also are taking you to places that some of those very large cruise ships can't get to. We stay longer in the ports that we take you to visit. So you get a really authentic version of that place. And it's kind of like a taster for maybe you wanting to go back there. So for us, I think it's really being confident in knowing who we are, but being equally as confident in knowing what we aren't,
right, and
helping people understand that.
So I think we have to wrap up here soon. Is that right? So let's ask about. I just wanted to ask you about what is next. Obviously, you are a disruptor in the marketplace, in the cruise line industry. The company as a whole is. So there's a lot of expectation on you personally, but also the company to do something disruptive and innovative. So maybe you can't share everything you're doing, but can you give us an inkling of what is next and what we should expect from you?
I think for us, we're trying to make the journey to figure out what you want to do with your vacation time easier. I think it's getting people a personal recommendation based on who they are and what they're doing without them having to do so much work to tell us. And I think, especially from American consumer, which is a large portion of who sails with us, they only have limited inventory on the vacation they can take. So we want to make sure that they feel confident in that choice. So getting them to that decision more quickly, feeling informed and very happy about what they're going to do is kind of where I'm going to spend my time and energy for the next 12 months. We'll use tools like AI, but it's also about giving back the humans that work at Virgin Voyages some strategic time to think about how that innovation can really accelerate those choices.
And your next cruise?
My next cruise will be in Portugal in just a month. We have something called the Celebration Voyage, and Mel C from the Spice Girls is going to be there.
Nice.
Yes. Very excited. I will say it's really nice to work at a brand where you love going on the product. So not everybody gets to say that.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a real blessing.
Wow. This has been a real blessing.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Billy. Cheers.